For 2 straight weeks, Leo had made the pilgrimage to the new coffee shop on the corner. His dedication was clockwork, a ritual more consistent than that of the actual employees. He always claimed the same small table in the deepest corner, a secluded nook that offered a view of the entire floor. Today was no different. A low voice, smooth as espresso, inquired if he had decided on an order. The server approaching his table moved with an effortless elegance, their slender build and flowing, floral print dress reminiscent of a rare lily blooming in the urban chaos. Leo felt a blush creep up his neck and quickly hid his face behind the laminated menu. It was strange. This server never usually worked his section. The voice, as if reading his mind, explained that Chloe was out and they were covering her tables. They then asked, with a hint of amusement, if it would be a cappuccino as usual. Leo, completely mesmerized, could only manage a series of frantic nods. He waited until the server had glided away before he pinched his own thigh in frustration. He cursed himself for his timidity. Such a perfect opportunity, and he'd forgotten to even ask for a name. He was so lost in his self-reproach that he missed the ghost of a smile that graced the server's lips as they turned away. The coffee arrived with a quiet admonition to enjoy it. Leo offered a mumbled thanks, his attention already back on the frantic tapping of his laptop keys. He was venting to a friend over a chat window, complaining that his graphic novel was due but the new or demanded endless revisions and had cut his favorite scene. He felt a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest, a helpless frustration with no clear outlet. A moment later, the light tap of long, pale fingers on the edge of his table broke his concentration. He glanced up, ready to apologize for the clatter of his keyboard, but the words died in his throat. The server was back, standing so close that the warm, earthy scent of coffee beans seemed to emanate directly from them. Their eyes, the color of warm honey, held a gentle, knowing gaze, framed by dark curls that fell in soft waves. Leo felt himself being pulled into their orbit, completely captivated. He noticed for the first time a small, engraved name tag pinned to the bodice of the dress. Julian. He silently committed the name to memory, a surge of quiet triumph coursing through him. Julian had returned bearing a small bowl of ice cream. Leo, confused, mentioned that he hadn't ordered it. Julian simply nodded, explaining it was complimentary and that a little sugar could improve one's mood. As Julian turned to leave, the tiered ruffles of the dress, like the petals of an elaborate flower, brushed against Leo's ankle. The fleeting touch sent a jolt of heat through him. Julian paused, noticing Leo's distracted state, and arched a delicate eyebrow, asking if the flavor was not to his liking. Leo, his face burning, assured him that he loved it, mentally berating himself for his shameless fantasies over a simple act of kindness. After 2 sleepless nights, he finally submitted his revised draft just before the deadline. Exhausted but triumphant, he rushed to the coffee shop, only to collide with someone just outside the entrance. He stumbled backward, but a firm hand gripped his shoulder to steady him. The familiar scent of coffee enveloped him. He looked up, stunned, into Julian's concerned eyes. They both began to apologize at once. A clumsy duet of "I'm so sorry and it was my fault. I wasn't looking." Leo had to physically suppress the goofy, triumphant grin that threatened to split his face. This was practically an embrace. Before he could regain his footing, a shove from behind sent him lurching forward. An impatient voice grumbled about him blocking the way. At the same moment, Julian's urgent to be careful reached his ears, and he found himself pulled fully into Julian's arms. Leo's brain short-circuited. He could feel the heat radiating from his own head as if he were a steam engine. Inside, sitting at his usual table, Leo remained in a daze. The embrace hadn't been a gentle nudge from Cupid. It had been a direct, brutal impalement with the whole arrow. He made a silent, solemn vow. Today was the day he would get Julian's contact information. As evening approached, the cafe emptied out, leaving only a few scattered patrons. Julian stood behind the counter, polishing glasses with a focused intensity. The setting sun slanted through the large front window, casting him in a golden spotlight. His curls seemed to catch the light, creating a soft, fuzzy halo. One stubborn lock of hair sprang up from his forehead, a cute, rebellious detail that made Leo's heart ache. Watching Julian work, a profound sense of peace settled over him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. The tranquility was shattered by the sharp crash of breaking glass. A man's jeering voice cut through the quiet hum of the cafe. It was the same man who had pushed him at the door. He was taunting one of the younger servers, who was bowing repeatedly in apology. The server insisted she would pay for his dry cleaning but pleaded with him not to touch her leg. The man, incensed by the stares of other customers, began spouting nonsense and then lifted his own coffee cup, threatening to douse her. Leo, being the closest, reacted on pure instinct. He shot out of his chair and twisted the man's arm, redirecting the trajectory of the coffee. The young server was unharmed, but she cried out in alarm, her eyes fixed on something just past Leo's shoulder. The manager. Crap. Leo turned to see that the entire contents of the cup had soaked Julian's dress. The belligerent customer was ejected, and Leo trailed behind Julian into the back office like a guilty puppy. He insisted on paying for the dry cleaning, his voice thick with apology. Julian waved it off, saying he was grateful for Leo's bravery. Alone with Julian, Leo's heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The setting sun, filtered through the blinds of the office window, created a cage of light and shadow around them. Julian's low voice was like a melody as he asked if Leo wasn't getting enough rest, commenting that he looked exhausted. Leo could have cried. Of course, he looked like a wreck after his all-nighters, but the desperate need to see Julian had overridden all common sense. His brain, sluggish from fatigue, suddenly recalled his mission. He blurted out a request for Julian's contact information, his face flaming as he held out his phone with both hands in a gesture that resembled a formal bow. Julian's shoulders shook with silent laughter at his earnestness. Then, a strange question. Julian told him, his voice a little rougher than usual, that he was older than Leo. Leo, confused but determined, stammered that he was an adult. Julian's lips curved into a slow smile. He said that wasn't the kind of age he was talking about. He leaned in, backing Leo against the wall until there was no escape. Then he lifted the hem of his dress. He enunciated each word with deliberate clarity. Understood now? Leo was dumbfounded, his mind a complete blank. He turned to leave in a stupor, only to be hooked back by a long, elegantly shod leg. Julian asked where he thought he was going. He explained that since they were short-staffed, he, as the manager, had to fill in. And besides, he added with a wink, he enjoyed dressing up. He said nothing more, allowing Leo to process the information. He hummed a little tune, letting the skirt fall back into place and twirling lightly on his heel. The intricate floral embroidery on the dress seemed to bloom into life with the movement, the fabric whispering against Leo's legs. Leo's head was spinning. Of course, Julian had never once said he wasn't a man. It was Leo's own assumption. He managed to stammer out an acknowledgement, desperate not to cause offense but still reeling from the revelation. Julian tilted his head, studying his expression with an amused glint in his eye, remarking on Leo's cool reaction. He sounded disappointed, but his smile remained. Leo apologized, hating the way his nerves made him stutter. Julian held out an open palm, gesturing for the phone. He said he would give Leo his number, then paused, asking with a mock-innocent pout if he still wanted it. Leo quickly handed over his device, only for the screen to flicker and die. The battery was dead. A fresh wave of mortification washed over him. He dropped his head and began fiddling with his fingers, unable to meet Julian's gaze. Julian observed thoughtfully that Mr. Yuan seemed to apologize a lot since they'd met, and that he seemed to struggle with social interactions. Leo had no defense. He'd been told he had the social grace of a robot before. He knew it was true. But wait, how did Julian know his name? Before he could voice the question, a cool sensation touched his skin. He flinched. Julian had pulled a marker from a pocket on his dress, uncapped it with his teeth, and was now writing something on the skin just above his collarbone. He met Leo's wide eyes and explained that this was his phone number. The tip of the marker moved slowly, the friction against his skin a strange, intimate whisper. Leo held his breath, his entire body tense. Julian's proximity was overwhelming, his breath warm against Leo's neck. He was certain his skin was radiating heat. Surely it didn't take this long to write a phone number. Just as he was about to speak, Julian pulled back, admiring his handiwork. He asked if Leo would be coming back. Leo nodded dumbly, praying Julian couldn't see how flushed his face was. Julian's smile widened. He would see him tomorrow, he said. As Leo walked away, his heart still thundering, he didn't hear Julian's quiet murmur to his retreating back, a soft, anticipatory whisper that was quickly lost to the evening breeze. The next day, Leo was a mess. He salted his eggs instead of sugaring them, tripped over the robotic vacuum, and managed to coat his hair in a sticky layer of styling gel that required another shower. As he neared the cafe, he nervously fiddled with the collar of his shirt, and the top button popped off, skittering away across the sidewalk. He groaned and scrambled after it. The button rolled to a halt next to a pair of polished leather shoes. The owner of the shoes bent down, picked it up, and tossed it lightly in his hand. It was Julian. He always seemed to appear at Leo's most graceless moments. He looked impossibly handsome in men's clothes. Julian asked with a teasing grin if Mr. Yuan was racing his button. He'd caught it, he said, holding it out in his open palm. Leo reached for it, but before he could take it, Julian closed his fist around it. He told Leo to come inside, that he would sew it back on for him. As he led Leo toward the door, his hand remained firmly clasped around Leo's. Leo was too shocked to even say thank you. Before he could process what was happening, Julian flipped the open sign in the door to closed for a private event. Noticing Leo's confusion, Julian simply said that this might take a while, offering a brilliant smile but no further explanation. Leo felt a sudden, distinct sense of being a lamb led to the slaughter. Julian's apartment was directly above the cafe. The entryway was dim, and Julian explained that the light had burned out. He suggested Leo hold onto him if he couldn't see. Leo, without a second thought, took hold of Julian's sleeve. He felt Julian hesitate for a fraction of a second before leading him into the living room and gesturing for him to sit on the couch. Then, holding a needle and thread, he told him to take off his shirt. It was a logical request. But the image of Julian sewing the button while Leo was wearing the shirt, being held in his arms or sitting on his lap, flashed through his mind. He cursed his own perverted imagination. The simple act of unbuttoning his shirt under Julian's watchful gaze felt monumental. He fumbled, his fingers clumsy. He tried to explain that the shirt was new and the buttonholes were still stiff. He was so focused on the task that he didn't notice where Julian's eyes were fixed until, 3 buttons down, Julian cleared his throat and looked away, telling him to take his time. When Leo glanced up, he saw that a deep blush had spread from the tips of Julian's ears all the way down his neck. Julian mumbled an apology, explaining that it was getting colder and he'd assumed Leo would be wearing an undershirt. He rushed towards the bedroom, saying he'd find something for Leo to wear, his retreat almost comical in its haste. Leo was mortified. His unhesitating disrobing must have made him seem incredibly forward. To his surprise, Julian returned not with a shirt, but with a dress. He asked if Leo wanted to wear it. Leo was confused. Julian raised an eyebrow, explaining that he thought Leo might want to try it, since he seemed to like it so much the other day in the cafe. The realization hit Leo like a physical blow. He hadn't been admiring the dress. He had been admiring Julian. The time for pretense was over. He began to stammer an explanation, but Julian interrupted him with a question, his voice a low thrum. The rich, slightly sweet scent of coffee that always clung to him seemed to intensify. He asked, his eyes searching Leo's, if he wasn't looking at the dress. Was he perhaps looking at him? Leo blurted out that yes, he liked Julian. At the exact same moment, Julian finished his own sentence. S face? They both stared at each other, stunned. It was a confession, loud and undeniable. The ensuing silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic drumming of Leo's heart. A shadow fell over him. A gentle pressure on his chin tilted his head up. Julian's voice was soft but insistent. He told Leo to look at him. The usual composed, elegant demeanor was gone. Julian's expression was one of pure, unadulterated delight. His smile stretched into something wild and predatory. He asked Leo to say it again. Left with no other choice, Leo repeated the words, his voice barely a whisper. I like you. The rest of his sentence was swallowed by Julian's lips. The kiss was gentle at first, a careful exploration, but it quickly deepened. Leo felt a jolt of disbelief. He tried to speak, but Julian took the opportunity to press further, his tongue inviting Leo's into a dizzying dance. The couch dipped beside him as Julian sat down, then lifted him effortlessly, settling him onto his lap so they were face to face. The sudden fulfillment of his earlier fantasy sent a wave of shame and excitement crashing over him. This new position presented an unforeseen complication. An insistent pressure against him made it impossible to ignore their proximity. He tried to shift, but Julian's hands on his waist were firm, his touch sending shivers down his spine. He reached up and grabbed a handful of Julian's hair, his voice choked. Julian pulled back, his face flushed, his breath coming in short gasps. His usually neat hair was in disarray. He looked utterly debauched, and Leo was completely captivated. He struggled to find the words to ask why Julian was kissing him, why he was touching him. Julian misinterpreted his distress. His fingers slid lower, his touch light and teasing as he asked if it was uncomfortable. His breath was hot against Leo's ear as he unbuckled Leo's belt. Leo flinched, his ears being acutely sensitive. Julian chuckled, pressing closer, his lips brushing against Leo's earlobe as he offered to help. Leo's mind reeled. Boyfriend? When had that happened? In his moment of confusion, Julian's nimble fingers had already found their way into his trousers. He grabbed Julian's wrist, but his resistance was feeble. Julian looked him straight in the eye and stated, with perfect seriousness, that he would never do this with someone who wasn't his lover. He told Leo that he liked him, too. And then, while his hands were still busy, he formally asked Leo to go out with him. The sheer absurdity of the situation was overwhelming. Leo begged him to slow down, but his pleas only seemed to fuel Julian's excitement. The world began to spin. He felt Julian bite his earlobe, a sharp, electric sensation that sent a final, shattering tremor through his body. He collapsed into Julian's arms, gasping for breath. Their relationship was official, yet it all felt like a dream. The only proof was the neatly mended button on his shirt, which now hung in a place of honor by his door. Every time he saw it, a stupid grin spread across his face. His phone buzzed, displaying a message from Julian surrounded by a string of heart emojis. The cafe had a new cherry cake. Did he want to come try it? His heart soared. Before he could type his reply, a call from his or brought him crashing back to earth. He was reminded of the book signing at 11. A stylist was already on the way. His wings of joy were clipped. He had to cancel on Julian, offering a lame excuse about a sudden work issue. Julian's reply was a simple, cheerful emoji of a waiting dog. Weeks passed in a blur of work. The signing was followed by a talk show appearance. He hadn't seen Julian in 3 weeks. He missed him terribly. His replies to Julian's invitations were always the same, a string of apologies and requests to reschedule. Julian never complained, which only deepened Leo's guilt. During a break in the talk show recording, he tried to text Julian an explanation, but was herded back on stage. The bright lights and the sea of faces in the audience made his head spin. He went through the motions, answering the host's questions with a practiced, hollow smile. Then came the audience Q&A. His anxiety spiked. He scanned the crowd, his gaze landing on a familiar figure in the front row. It was Julian. He had no idea how Julian had found out about his schedule, but the sight of him was like an anchor in a storm. Julian raised his hand, a playful smile on his face. He asked, his voice carrying clearly through the studio, if fans would ever see the conclusion to The Hollow Man and the Pearl. A ripple of knowing laughter went through the crowd. It was Leo's debut webcomic, a project he'd abandoned years ago. Leo, clutching the microphone, felt a surge of emotion. He announced that the comic would be re-released soon as a collected volume. The audience erupted in cheers. The rest of the interview passed in a warm, happy blur. After the show, he was mobbed by fans. By the time he broke free, he was running late. He sprinted to the parking garage, terrified that Julian might have gotten tired of waiting and left. He was scanning the empty rows of cars when a pair of arms wrapped around him from behind. The comforting scent of coffee filled his senses. Julian put a finger to his lips, then scooped him up, deposited him in the back seat of his car, and slid in beside him, all in one fluid motion. Leo started to apologize for being late, but Julian shushed him again, pointing toward the garage entrance where a group of fans were still searching for him. Julian whispered that the car's windows were tinted, but the soundproofing was terrible. Leo nodded in understanding. He then became acutely aware of a new problem. In the cramped back seat, Julian's knee was wedged firmly between his legs. He tried to shift away, but he was already pressed against the door. The smooth fabric of his suit trousers offered no resistance. Julian adjusted his position, bracing his arms on either side of Leo to get a better look out the window. Every slight movement sent a fresh wave of friction through Leo's overstimulated nerves. He tried to ignore it, but his body had other ideas. Julian seemed oblivious, his attention fixed on the retreating fans. When they were finally gone, he turned to Leo with a triumphant smile, his body pressing closer. Leo, his voice strained, asked him to move. Julian's face fell into a theatrical pout. He said he was hurt, that he thought Leo would have missed him. Leo tried to explain that wasn't what he meant, but Julian's fingers had already found his belt buckle. Julian's gaze dropped meaningfully. He murmured that at least one part of Leo seemed happy to see him. Leo was speechless. Julian had to be doing this on purpose. Before he could react, Julian's hands were at work again. He protested that it would make a mess in the car. Julian, seemingly prepared for this, produced 3 boxes of condoms from his pocket. Leo's attempt to escape was thwarted as Julian pulled him back into his arms, whispering that since he was the cause of the problem, it was only right that he solve it. The windows fogged over. In a dizzying haze, Leo felt like he was on a swing, soaring up and crashing down. The parking garage was deserted, and Julian was taking full advantage of the privacy. He asked for Leo's autograph, not on paper but on his body. Leo, utterly exhausted, agreed to anything. He fumbled for his signing pen, but Julian stopped him. He wanted a different kind of signature. He took a part of Leo in his hand, pressing it against his own chest. Use this pen, he instructed. Leo's mind went blank as Julian used him to write messy, illegible characters across his skin, until there was nothing left to give. Julian licked his lips, admiring the mess on his chest like a priceless work of art. It was the best autograph he'd ever received, he declared. Leo could barely move, but he was dimly aware of Julian's lips moving down his body, a warm, wet reward for his efforts. He tried to protest, to crawl away, but his legs only succeeded in trapping Julian's head, giving him better access. A strangled gasp escaped Julian's throat, and in that same instant, Leo's world exploded into a shower of stars. Julian's birthday was approaching. After the intensity of their reunion in the parking garage, he had been noticeably more restrained, perhaps realizing he had pushed things too far. Their intimacy was limited to chaste hugs and hand-holding. Julian would meticulously rub lotion into Leo's dry hands, his own nose red from the cold, his voice muffled by his scarf as he apologized for his previous lack of control and asked why Leo never got angry with him. As he fussed, pulling gloves onto Leo's hands, a tender warmth bloomed in Leo's chest. He told Julian that if he wanted to make it up to him, he could. He wanted a cappuccino made by the manager himself. Julian executed a dramatic bow, declaring it would be his honor. Leo laughed, grabbing his hand and pulling him into a run as the crosswalk light began to flash. They ran, hand in hand, through the glittering cityscape, two young lovers embracing a world that seemed to shimmer just for them. Leo decided Julian deserved a reward. He bought baking supplies and practiced at home. On the day of Julian's birthday, he arrived at the apartment laden with bags, ready to bake a cherry cake to make up for the one he had missed. In the kitchen, Julian insisted on helping, but his help quickly turned into him expertly taking over. Leo watched, slightly chagrined, as Julian slid the perfect cake batter into the oven. He decided to at least whip the cream. Julian came up behind him, his hands on his shoulders, and murmured that he was only helping because he was in a hurry. Leo, focused on the mixer, asked what he was in a hurry for. Julian's reply was a low, wicked purr. To eat something else. Before Leo could react, Julian was undressing him. He found himself lying on the dining table, Julian standing over him with a spatula, slowly spreading whipped cream over his body. The cool metal of the spatula on his skin made him shiver. Julian placed a single, perfect cherry on his chest. Leo protested weakly that he was not a cake. Julian agreed, but that didn't stop him from leaning down to try and retrieve the cherry with his mouth. The cherry rolled around, and Leo, caught up in the ridiculousness of it all, started giving him directions. Julian started to shake with suppressed laughter, asking if he was supposed to provide an instruction manual for his own consumption. Leo froze. He should be fighting this, not participating. Julian didn't give him time to dwell on it. He began licking the cream from his skin, his eyes locked with Leo's. A deep, shameful excitement began to build inside him. He tried to push Julian away, but was rewarded with a sharp, possessive bite on his collarbone. He cried out, wrapping his arms around Julian's neck and burying his face in his shoulder, begging him to stop. Julian, clearly pleased, lifted him from the table. Leo's legs instinctively wrapped around his waist. The oven timer dinged. The cake had risen into a perfect golden dome. But neither of them had any appetite left for it. Julian tilted his chin up, demanding his full attention. "Open your mouth, Leo." Julian tasted of cream and sugar. At the stroke of midnight, Leo managed a weak happy birthday and tried to get out of bed to give Julian his real gift. But Julian caught his wrists, pinning them above his head. He pulled a lace ribbon from the nightstand, one he used for his hair, and tied it around Leo's head in a neat bow. He smiled, a dangerous, beautiful smile. "Thank you for the gift," he said. "Now, can I open it?" A cold dread washed over Leo. He insisted he couldn't continue, that it was too much. Julian cradled his face, his gaze intense. One last time, he promised. He shouldn't have believed him,